Hello, I'm Mary Noble, and Happy New Year! No, it's not January yet. We're still in August, but it kind of is a new year because as of last month when our Charge Conference met, we have new officers, we have a new program, a new leadership year. And so welcome to all of you who are beginning as of August 1, starting a new ministry, a new leadership year with our church. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for saying yes to God, and thank you for trusting that God is going to use you this year. I look forward to seeing what we do together in building God's kingdom. Recently, I read an article that was talking about what's my narrative? And it was talking about the pandemic. What's my narrative through this pandemic? What are the stories I'm telling myself? How am I interpreting it? But it made me think about us as a new year before us as leaders in the church. It made me think, what is our narrative as leaders of First United Methodist Church? And that's what I'd like to encourage you to think about as you lead this year. So what's our narrative? Two things I'd like you to consider. First, this first element of the narrative, I'd like you to keep in mind that even though we've been in a pandemic, even though our building has been closed some, we have never stopped being the church. We've never stopped being in ministry. We've never stopped reaching out. It's looked very different, but we've still been in ministry. God has used us. And so as much as things are going to feel different, there's some basics that we can hold to, that God is faithful. God has not left us. God will not leave us. And God is working for good, even through this pandemic. There are some amazing things that God has done, and I know there will be amazing things that God will use you in and through this next year. So remember that, the basics, that God is with us, that God has called us for a higher purpose, and that God will use us for His glory. That is a great gift. So as you are leading this year, things will look a little different, though we will have to do things at times different than we normally would. But I want to remind you that we still need some tasks accomplished. Trustees, we still need you to maintain this building. We still need you to continue to make it operational. To all our children and tween and youth, chairs and leaders, we still need you to help provide faith formation opportunities for our younger disciples of our church. We need all of you in your committees to be leading us through how we continue to be faithful disciples who make other growing and maturing disciples in this journey together. So in this first narrative, chairs, you might be thinking, am I in here alone? Am I doing this by myself? No way. You've got a whole arsenal of support around you. You've got a staff liaison, at least one, who is going to help you. They're going to be a resource to pray with you, to advise you, and to just help encourage and to think about new ways of things and how they might help you in ministry. You also have a team before you that you are leading and equipping, and I hope you'll do more than just facilitate. I hope you'll be the leader who's leading in faith, leading in Christ, that you're praying for them, but you're also equipping them to be who God's called them to be, because God will use each one sitting around your table or on your screen in a great way for our church to be who God's called us to be. I've got a document that you were emailed when you got this video. It's also on our website. It's some helpful hints about meetings. I'm not going to read it to you. I know you can read, but I encourage you to use that as a resource. It's there to help. It will help you know some of the basics of meetings, how to get things done. The most important thing you'll learn from it is Paula Harrison, our office manager, is probably going to be your new best friend. She's the one who can look at the church calendar and do scheduling. She's the one who can set up emails and assign conference rooms. She's also the one that can help you get your email list and get your team together. She's a great resource. Since you most likely will be meeting some via Zoom, since we're not able to be in person for a little bit longer, we have set up where you can have a Zoom for your team. Your staff liaison will help with that. And so that is available to you as well. So this first narrative is keeping in ministry, keeping your team functioning and doing what God has called us to do. But this second narrative, for some of you, this will be very exciting. And for others, this might pull you out of your comfort zone a little bit, because this second narrative just reminds us to be creative. They're creative beings God's called us to be. For back in March, everything changed. Our world kind of did a topsy-turvy, upside down. We all got out of our comfort zone and probably are still out of our comfort zone if we're honest. But since March, we've been doing things different. And as a staff, yeah, it's felt different, but it's also felt amazing to just be willing to do what it takes to build God's kingdom, to make disciples, to be available to say yes to God. And so we've had a lot of creativity as a staff. We've done things differently. We've relied on each other to pull things off and to see it work. And so we've done that, and God has blessed us. And so I want to encourage you and your team. You've got permission to be creative. You've got permission to do something new. Our God is a God of new beginnings. It's all throughout Scripture. And so maybe do something new this year. Maybe it looks different to get your team together. Maybe it looks different to fulfill your task. But I hope you will embrace those new beginnings. Be creative. The slate is blank and it's clear. What it looks like to build God's kingdom is wide open. I hope you'll embrace that as a second narrative. We've got a great year before us. I hope these two narratives will be something that you hold in tandem. Hold the practical side of having a meeting and doing the task of your committee that you're charged with, while also being creative, being open to God's Spirit, trusting that God will guide you and direct you and use you. We've got a great year ahead of us. I know God will use us. I know God will use you. And so I look forward to how God knits us all together and does great things that we'll be able to look at together next year. I'm thankful for you. I look forward to serving with you. And let's walk this journey together.
Congratulations on being a leader. You are a leader. You might want to say that to yourself or pat yourself on the back and say, I'm a leader. Come on now, let's loosen up. I am a leader. Your church has discerned, our church has discerned that God has raised you up for leadership in our family of faith at this time. Congratulations. You have the potential to be a great leader, maybe the best set of leaders we've ever had. One of my favorite stories has to do with Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown takes his bow and arrows out, and he's with Linus, and he's going to shoot those arrows, shoots them toward a barn. And he shoots them, and they go, boom, they land. Boom, 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 boom. And then Charlie Brown puts his bow and arrow down, and he gets a big can of spray paint, and he does this around those arrows. And Linus says, what are you doing, Charlie Brown? And Charlie Brown says, well, I'm putting a target up there, and I always like to hit the bullseye. Oh, I know a lot of people. I mean, a lot of churches who do church leadership that way. They really do. They just shoot a bunch of arrows. That's how they lead. They throw things out there. They send out all sorts of emails. They have all sorts of programs, all sorts of activities. They're always throwing stuff out, and whatever sticks on the wall, whatever seems to make people happy, they go, well, that's our purpose. That's what we're here for. That's our goal. I want to propose another way of leading in just a few minutes with a few words. Let me say that leaders lead the mission. No one will lead the mission in your team, your board, your committee, except for you. Leaders lead the mission, and the mission of our church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That's it. Making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. How do we do that? Well, we symbolize that with our logo that says reaching out. It's who we are. We're always reaching out to make disciples, always reaching out to transform the world. And so everything falls underneath that umbrella. Making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Which means if your team, if your group, if your work area, your board is engaged in projects that don't make disciples or don't transform people, or perhaps what you're doing, some project you've got doesn't really transform the world, you may have strayed from your mission. It may be that the Rotary Club is called to do that, or the Girl Scouts, or perhaps there's a ball team or a PTO that's called to do that. You're called, we're called to make disciples of Jesus, who go and transform the world, who spread into the world, spreading kindness and love and forgiveness and mercy and grace. That's our great call. That's our great call. So leaders lead the mission. Leaders also shepherd other people. You may think it's shepherd. Yeah, the people in your group, the people on your team, the people in your committee, your board, they're like your flock, your herd. I hope you'll take time every time you meet to talk about your life and your spiritual journey together. I hope you'll take time every time that you meet to share joys and concerns. I hope that you'll shepherd them in such a way that you'll become one of the first people in their life to know when they have a great joy or a great concern. Shepherd them. For some of them, your team, your group will be the only small group they're involved in our church. Be their shepherd. And shepherds are, it takes care, it takes prayer, it takes a lot of things. I think Lynn will help us with that later. Leaders also delegate. Do you remember Jethro in the Old Testament? Not Jethro Bodine, that's another guy. Jethro, who was the father-in-law of Moses. Remember, he saw Moses, they were out in the wilderness wandering around. Moses was doing his thing, being a prophet, being a judge over the people. He was ruling on people's disputes day in, day out. And Jethro came and saw him and he said, Moses, this is my interpretation. He said, what are you doing? You're going to wear yourself out. You're working all the time. You can't do this and be a leader. You've got to find some men and train them and then let them handle some of your responsibilities. In other words, you've got to delegate. Now, he chose men. Maybe if he'd chosen some women, they wouldn't have remained in the wilderness for 40 years, but that's a whole other subject. But he delegated. He learned how to delegate in order to lead. Andy Stanley says leadership is about getting things done through other people. We're to delegate. That's what leaders do. You are not the team. You are not the committee. You are not the board. God has called others to be on your committee, your team, your board. God has put passion and gifts in other people, and they're right there with you, waiting to find out where they need to go, what they need to do. Don't limit your ministry to just what you can do. It'll be really small. You've got a whole team there. If I limited my ministry here at the church, our ministry if it was all limited to what the senior pastor could do, oh my word. We'd have only worship services where I could be present. We would only have one Sunday school class. We wouldn't have a respite. We wouldn't have a harbor. We wouldn't have children Tuesday night church party. We wouldn't have block party. Others. Oh, my thing's falling. Others have to, but I'm not stopping because I'm persistent. Leaders are persistent. Others are gifted and can do that. That's great. So I hope that you'll delegate. Leaders also create the future. We can create the future. One of the things you'll hear me say over and over and over and over and over again is our people are where we have led them. Our people are where we have led them. We are today, as a church, where our leaders led 3 years ago. They led us here. Where we will be 5 years from now all depends on where you and your team will lead this year. There's no imaginary person out there to blame for anything and to get the credit. It's always the same. Our leaders are where we've led them. Or our churches, our people are where we've led them. Leaders also embrace change. I just want to mention that. I want you to just be cognizant of the fact that if you and your team, your board, your committee do things like they were done here in 1990 or in the year 2000, then they're probably ineffective ways of doing things. Things have changed too much in this world. People learn differently now in this world. People grow differently. Things are too rapid paced. We can't. If our Sunday school classes, let's say in the children's division, still look like they did in the year 2000 with little classes broken up into grades and with teachers rotating in, then we will be ineffective because children learn in different ways now. There's more effective ways of learning. If we're still doing committee meetings like we did 10 years ago, we've missed it. I mean, we have two parents working in most families. Every single committee meeting ought to be recorded so that it can be sent out videoed out to those who couldn't be there because they were with a sick child, or because one of the parents had to work, or because they had ball practice, or because one parent was out of town on business. We ought to be able to provide all sorts of opportunities for people to be in ministry. We've got to move forward. Now, there are a lot of other things I could say about leaders, but I'm not. I'm going to hold to my time. I just want to say a few words about our BHAGs, our big, hairy, audacious goals. BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals. We have 3 BHAGs. We established those toward the end of last year, the first of 2020. There's 3 of them. They're not in any order. I'll just start and talk about one. Radical Hospitality. That's being led now by Jack Hennon and doing a superb job. I think you'll hear from Jack about this a little bit later. We want to be a radically hospitable church. I have a vision of us being the most welcoming, the most kind, the most loving, the most forgiving, the most non-judgmental, Christ-like people in Dothan. I have this vision of people seeing us just sharing mercy and kindness and grace and patience and acceptance and inclusion, and have this vision of them saying, "Oh, boy, you must be a member of First United Methodist Church in Dothan. I can tell by the way you live." We want to be radically hospitable. One of our other BHAGs, one of the 3, you could call it a second, has to do with discipleship. It's growing mature disciples who grow mature disciples. Growing mature disciples who grow mature disciples. I have a vision of a church being known for receiving people where they are and moving them deeper in their Christian walk, in their discipleship, and moving them into leadership so they can lead others. In other words, you can't be a student all your life. At some point, you get to bring and disciple others. I have a vision of a system where we determine where people are in their maturity level, and then we put them with groups that are right there and taking them to a different sort of level. And the last one, the last BHAG, is a new modern worship service. We're well past the time for a new contemporary service that reaches a diverse group of people. I have a vision of reaching a more diverse group of people and more non-church people through another contemporary worship service. I've been leading that. COVID sort of stuck a little nail in that for a while. We were going to begin after Labor Day, but we haven't even been able to meet over it. So it's still there. We'll have more as they come along, and we'll accomplish some of these. But those are our big BHAGs. I'll get in sync with the lean on my camera. Our big, hairy, audacious goals. Thanks a lot. Peace.
Hello, I'm Jack, and I'm going to talk about radical hospitality. You may want to pause this video and take notes, so I hope you'll be ready to do so. In Matthew 22, Jesus sets the foundation for all the law and the prophets. And in so doing, he actually gives us a reason for why our committees at First United Methodist Church in Dothan exist. It is because our hope is to invite the church and our neighbors to love God and to love people. Now, if we're going to love people well, that means that we are going to need radical hospitality. This is one of the big, hairy, audacious goals for our church. A BHAG. And the book by Jim Collins, called Built to Last, says that a BHAG should be exciting, it should be energetic for the community, it's something that we can rally together around, it should be compelling, and it should be clear. It should be something that we strive for and know what we're striving for. So let me help make it clearer and more compelling. Remember this: radical hospitality is joining together in overcoming what is overwhelming. Radical hospitality is joining together in overcoming what is overwhelming. Now, this is biblical, and a great example may be something as simple as Mark chapter 9, verse 41, where it talks about offering a cup of cold water. It could be something as complicated as making someone family, like in Ruth 1, verse 16. Jesus, of course, in John's Gospel, chapter 13, he washes the disciples' feet as an example of the radical hospitality that they're supposed to have for one another and for their community. Your work as a chair of a committee doesn't always mean that you're going to have to overcome what is overwhelming, but it does mean that hopefully you will invite the people in your committee into a place where they can do that together. Radical hospitality is a physical action supported by a spiritual purpose that creates a mental attitude. You can see this kind of progression in Luke 19, where Jesus interacts with Zacchaeus. And of course, it is a physical action supported by a spiritual purpose that creates a mental attitude. And we can do this in our committees, as a matter of fact. Part of your job as a chair is to do this, to create physical actions undergirded by a spiritual purpose that will create a mental attitude in your committee. Let me give you an example. My family recently was quarantined because of COVID-19, and when some committee chairs heard about that, they called me up and they said, "What can we do for you?" Specifically, they asked, "What's your children's favorite ice cream, and what kind of food would you like delivered?" And so these people, they created a physical action. They brought food to our house. Food can often be radically hospitable. And they, I would believe, did this because of a spiritual purpose. Maybe John, 1 John chapter 4, verses 4 through 7 were on their mind, where it says that God is love. They wanted to love well. And so because of their love, because of their sharing, it created for me a mental attitude where now I pay a lot more attention to people who are quarantined and try to figure out ways that I can help. So see, this progression of radical hospitality creates more radical hospitality. I'm not saying that you have to take someone's food. I am saying that you can be hospitable and with your committee, and in turn, this is going to encourage hospitality. So you can ask yourself, before you gather every time, and perhaps when you engage with your team, one important question. What can I do to show them that I am with them? Eventually, this will create a window for God to show up and overcome what is overwhelming. The great gift of your committee is that you gather for a specific purpose or intent to talk about a particular resource. You don't have to gather the entire church to make this happen, just a particular aspect of it. And you'll find that radical hospitality can be a huge part of your life. I'm going to guess that you were asked to be the chair of a committee because someone shared radical hospitality with you, and you were really good at replicating that and sharing it with someone else. Praise be to God that you can do that in your committees. Remember, radical hospitality is joining together in overcoming what is overwhelming. And as a committee chair, I hope that you will strive for a physical action prompted by a spiritual response that will create a mental attitude for your committee. Thank you for serving. And if you'd like to discuss any further how we can talk about radical hospitality, I hope that you'll let me know. God bless, and I'm praying for you.
Whether you're coming on board and serving for your first year as chairing one of our teams or committees or boards, or maybe you're coming back for your second or your third year, there's something different about serving in the local church. And I dare say that you're probably a leader in other parts of your life, within your family, within your work, within your community. You may even chair other boards and groups in the community. But there's something that sets apart. There's something different that we bring to the table when we are involved in leadership in the church. And that is that you are a spiritual leader. Now, earlier, Jim had us pat ourselves on the back and say, you're a leader. I want to encourage you to go one more step further because we're advancing in our training today. So I want you to advance in your leadership. Pat yourself on the back and say, I'm a spiritual leader. Go ahead. I'm a spiritual leader. That's what's different about serving in the local church. That's what makes us different than Rotary or serving at work or another board or some of these great agencies that are part of our community. You heard earlier Jim talk about our BHAGs, and you heard Jack even go a little further in what that means for radical hospitality. Our BHAGs are what gives us focus. It's where we are intentionally pouring our energies, our money, our time, all that we're doing as a church body, together, united under the same purpose. Intentionality is a key effort in a BHAG, but it's also a key effort as a spiritual leader. For that's what sets us apart as being different. You're being intentional. Now, this being intentional doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. None of us are. We all have our growing edges. How we are being intentional to lead as a spiritual leader, of committing to yourself. Every day when you walk into life or walk into that meeting or whether hit that Zoom button to lead your team, your board, your group, you're committing to be intentional to lead as a spiritual leader. Now, one way that you can just have an intentional spirit about you is do something like this. Have a worship space around you. Have something that defines and is a visual reminder that this is a holy place, that we are about God's work. This is different than the rest of the world. This is not just a conference room and a table and chairs. This is a holy place of worship, and God is present with us, and God is going to use us, and we're a vessel for God's ministry and building God's kingdom, and that is so exciting to us. You heard also earlier how Jim shared that you as a leader are a shepherd, and that you're shepherding your flock as a team into ways that you're connecting with them. That's super important, but in order to be a shepherd, you've also got to have time to be a sheep. So whether that's spending your own time at home, the beginning of day, or end of your day in quiet time, or it's the way that you have already committed to this church of taking those membership vows, of being in your supporting the church in your prayers, your presence, your gifts, your service, and your witness. The way you worship, whether it's in your home or at the beach or in our worship spaces, as you worship, you're being intentional and growing as a sheep. As you pray, as you serve, as you share your faith with others, that's being intentional in leading and living differently. Now, during our meetings, there might be times that you're wrestling with hard decisions, that you've got something maybe new and different that we talked about earlier, a new beginning that's coming, and things aren't clear and we don't know what to do. I encourage you to spend the time when those moments come, whether it's a difference of opinion or just a hard thing to figure out, that you will pause and take that time to seek God, to know that God is in your midst. And there's nothing wrong with stopping in the middle of a meeting, even if you've already prayed at the beginning of a meeting, and stop and have a moment of prayer. Reminder that light that's lit is the light of Christ, and Christ is in our midst, and Christ is with us and guiding us. Spend that time together, knit together with one another. That's how we get the best collective wisdom of the group. That's how our teams work well together, as they struggle and wrestle and listen to each other and learn from one another and realize we are in this together and God uses us all. That's the beauty of the body of Christ, is God needs all of us to show up and do our part. Having differing opinions doesn't make anything bad. It just brings the richness to the table that we can get to the collective good. Finally, in all you do in ministry and with your team, I hope you'll point to God. Be reminded of John the Baptist, who prepared the way and pointed to Jesus in all he did. He pointed to the one that was to come. He prepared the way for the one to come. What did Jesus do? He pointed to God. Everything he did pointed to God, drew people to God. So may all that you do as a team, may all that you lead as a spiritual leader, may it point to God. May it point to your love of Christ and how you are trying your best to be a disciple, and you're being used by God to help others to be disciples. May you remember, as the psalmist wrote, the words of "Be still and know that I am God." May you have still moments where you are still with God, whether that's individually or as your group, as your team, as your flock. You're having still moments with God. Next, Lynn will share with us one simple spiritual discipline that's a practical way that you can do in stillness, that you can, as a spiritual leader, connect with your team in and through prayer. I hope you'll make this a part of your regular life and with your team. We're called to be different as the church. You're now a spiritual leader. You're equipped. I'm thankful for your leadership, and I know God is going to do great things, and you are in my prayers often. Go be that spiritual leader.
I'm going to talk a little bit about why being a team leader on our board of stewards is different from any other administrative task. First of all, because it's a board of stewards. A steward is someone put in charge of something that belongs to someone else. We're put in charge of something that belongs ultimately to God. And so everything that we do should be connected back to God. And yet a lot of the work seems exactly what we would do in a secular setting. How do we set our hearts on God while we do this work? Well, I'm going to give you one example. There are many. If you're interested in this line of thinking, do contact me. I'd love to share it. You can write everyone on your team's name down on cards or pieces of paper. What I've done is write down the name of my fellow pastors and find a time to remember them in prayer. For some people, it helps, especially when you're starting out, to have a special place, a special chair perhaps, to light a candle, to have an open Bible there as a way to bring your focus on things of God, and then to let yourself be still and quiet. That's easier said than done, but I've found that if you watch your breathing, if you make your breathing slower and steadier, that can help your mind calm down. And then to look at each name. I happen to have Jack's name here, so I'm going to just bring Jack into the presence of Christ in my mind. And I'm not going to have a long list of things I'm asking God to do for Jack. I'm not going to have a lot that I'm going to mention about Jack. I'm just going to, in my heart, in my mind, in my prayer, bring Jack into the presence of Christ. And be still with that for a while. And then I'm going to bring Mary Noble into the presence of Christ. And be still about that for a while. And then I'm going to bring Allie into the presence of Christ. And be still with that for a while. And then Jim, whoever the members of your team are. And then maybe the task. The task could be something that's not particularly spiritual, but it is spiritual because it's connected to the church. I could be on the trustees, and we might have a problem with a leaking roof. I'm going to let that leaking roof come into my mind in the presence of Christ and just be still for a while. And thank God for each of these people. Thank God for this very building. Thank God for whatever my task within the Board of Stewards is. If you can't do that for very long at a time, don't worry. You do it for as long as you can, and then let that time stretch out until all together we learn to place those with whom we work in this holy work in Christ's presence. And both the physical and spiritual things that comprise our work into Christ's presence, so that more and more we're being made like Christ, so that we can hear God and be guided by the Spirit. God bless you in your work on the Board of Stewards.
I'm wondering how you are feeling after all of this. Perhaps you're so excited that you're about to burst, ready to go. Maybe you're feeling a little confusion or some anxiety. Perhaps you feel overwhelmed. Well, welcome to leadership. Remember, our church has discerned that you are the right leader for this time and our journey together. God has placed you in leadership to lead, and God will be with you. I'd like to share a prayer with you now, and I invite you to write the prayer down. Write this prayer down so that you can have it for the next year. Here it is. God, let me make a difference. God, let me make a difference for you. That is utterly disproportionate. That is utterly disproportionate to who I am. To who I am. God, let me make a difference for you that is utterly disproportionate to who I am. I like that prayer. It's simple, it's powerful. It acknowledges our limitations. We are weak and fallible. As the old hymn says, we are prone to wander. The prayer also acknowledges God's limitlessness and God's habit of choosing ordinary people to do extraordinary things in this world. I want to do great things for God, great things for the kingdom. I want to see people come to Christ, to see people enveloped in the love of Christ and grow together, see them serve together and worship together. I want to see them do justice together, be kind together. I want Christ to use me to make a difference. So wonderful that people will say, hey, that's got to be a God thing, because Jim Sanders could never do that on his own. God must be at work. I want that. I hope you do too. So here's my challenge to you. For the entire time you chair your team or your committee or your board, I invite you to pray the following each day. God, let me make a difference for you that is utterly disproportionate to who I am. Pray it until it is burned into your memory and burned into your soul. God, let me make a difference for you that is utterly disproportionate to who I am. Pray until you believe God can use you. God, let me make a difference for you that is utterly disproportionate to who I am. Pray until you realize you're being used by God to make a tremendous difference in the lives of people in this world. God, let me make a difference for you that is utterly disproportionate to who I am. Now let's pray it together. God, let me make a difference for you that is utterly disproportionate to who I am, to who we are. Amen.